There is a place on Earth where people dig for gold every day, but still eat rice mixed with sand sleep in the Lao wind, and live as if they are gambling with their lives. There are no banks, no electricity, but there is pure gold, the kind that jewelers in Dubai or Switzerland drool over. Sounds like a fantasy movie, no. This is the reality in the middle of the Sahara Desert, where the have-nothing digs for what everyone wants. And the strange thing is that the more they dig, the poorer they become. The more they find gold, the more their lives spiral out of control. No cameras record it, no maps mark it. But today, you will know the truth that they have tried to hide for so many years. Number 1. Survival mechanism in the heart of Sahara. The Sahara Desert is not only arid from the sun and wind, but also plowed by thousands of deep pits. These are primitive mines just over a meter in diameter, dug entirely by hand and manual equipment. Each such pit can be up to 60, even 100 meters deep. There is no hydraulic lift system, no anti-collapse scaffolding, no dust masks. Workers take turns lowering themselves down with a rope tied to their waists below which temperatures can exceed 50 degrees Celsius, and the air is so thin that they cannot last more than a few hours. By mid-2023, more than 60,000 people were estimated to be mining in this way in the Tamaya region alone, a region deep in the interior of Mauritania. Although there are no official figures, the volume of gold leaving the makeshift mines has exceeded 10 tons in a year. In the middle of that nameless system is an informal value chain from the miners, the stone grinders, the gold collectors, to mobile collection points hundreds of kilometers away. There are no invoices, no taxes, no traffic control system other than the unwritten law. And there is no insurance, so when a sinkhole collapses, as happened just a few months ago, leaving dozens of people stranded, the whole area just stops for a day, then continues as before. A single block of rock with traces of gold can fetch 300, 500 darts, the equivalent of a month's salary in the capital Nouakchott. But what would you do if you were forced to crawl down a hole 3 times the height of a 5-story building with nothing but a roll of old rope and hope for luck? Would it be worth it? When what you found could only be resold into a chain of dealers you could never control. This system of exploitation is not spontaneous. It is the product of a mechanism that has lasted for decades. Marginalized people have been pushed into the shadows to make a living from the ground they never owned. Number 2. A short history of a long dream. The Sahara did not begin its gold rush in this century. The mineral veins scattered along transcontinental trade routes were once strategic assets for many powers, from ancient empires to colonial powers. In the 14th century, the Mali Empire controlled much of the continent's gold. Caravans crossed the desert to carry gold to Egypt, and from there to the Mediterranean and beyond. But as power shifted to international ports and markets, the ancient routes were abandoned, leaving hundreds of small, unregulated mining sites to spring up. Since 2009, global gold prices have been rising steadily, reaching more than $900 an ounce at one point. These price increases have sparked a new wave of mining in the Western Sahara. In Mauritania, Niger and Mali areas such as Tamaya Jado and Kayes have become hotspots. The labor force is mainly from arid rural areas where agricultural output has been steadily declining due to desertification and water shortages. People who used to make a living from herding livestock or small-scale farming are now mining for gold without training or technical inspection. The shift from agriculture to mining has been quiet but dramatic. Over an area of thousands of square kilometers, there are no official statistics to record the pace of change. Yet the population of places like Tamaya has increased by 300% in less than 2 years. In the middle of a deserted minefield, who controls what is being dug up? The question is answered not by a name, but by a map of underground export routes running north where gold is collected, cleaned, and shipped off the continent at double or triple the price at which it was mined. This is not just a trade flow. It is a history interrupted where new generations are no longer living on the legacy of their ancestors, but are trying to make do on the very land their ancestors have been deprived of. Number 3. Self-operating mechanism without rules. A mine doesn't just happen. Before the first pickaxe hits the ground, the chain of distribution of mining rights is already in place. Who supplies the equipment, who controls the land, who buys the product, and who keeps the process in order. In areas like Tamaya or Dijado, this is the actual structure of operations outside the formal legal system of the country. There are no permits, no oversight, no taxes. Workers gain access to a mine only by paying a fee for the use of the mine, or by sharing the proceeds with the group that controls the site. The typical split is 70-30 or 60-40. Data from major mining regions shows that the average miner keeps only about 20% of the real value of the gold they mine. There are no written contracts. All agreements are oral, bound by personal relationships or by force if there is a dispute. An unwritten system of law that is highly effective thanks to the absence of a formal legal system. In between, the question needs to be asked: who is really profiting the most? The campers without electricity or water, or the groups that coordinate the flow of goods behind the scenes, never revealing themselves? The current system exists not because it is efficient, but because it avoids oversight. It is a system in which loss of control is the very condition for its operation. Its persistence is not due to sustainability, but because no one has the power or the incentive to replace it. In this context, gold mining is no longer an economic activity, but a form of collective bargaining, a long-term trade-off between gains and losses with no clear winner. Number 4. Irrevocable consequences. The impact of gold mining in the Sahara does not stop at the mine sites. It extends fan-shaped into the social fabric, public health, and livelihoods. In areas where informal mining is carried out, mercury and cyanide are introduced to separate gold from ore at the rate of tons per year. These chemicals do not evaporate into the air, but instead stick to the soil, seep into waterways, and accumulate in the bodies of those who handle them. Rates of neurological and respiratory injuries are 2 to 3 times higher in residential areas near gold extraction sites than in non-mining areas. Symptoms such as hand tremors, loss of muscle control, and short-term memory loss are common among long-term workers. Without requiring complex medical diagnoses, monitoring the significantly shorter lifespan of workers in mines is enough to show a clear trend of health deterioration. In addition to the individual impacts, the ecosystems surrounding the mines are also being permanently changed. Land once used for grazing cattle or growing millet is being excavated, eroded, and polluted. Water resources already scarce are now contaminated with chemicals and are no longer fit for domestic use or farming. Communities that rely on traditional agriculture are being forced to move, not because they want to change, but because they have no viable options. A notable paradox is that the miners themselves often do not use the water source near the mine. They transport clean water from towns dozens of kilometers away by pickup truck or motorbike at a cost many times higher than the price of regular water. The reason lies not in convenience, but in the fact that they know very well which water is not good to drink. At a time when the amount of gold collected each month increases steadily, the area of arable land is constantly shrinking. Exchanging gold for land. Exchanging short-term profits for long-term losses. Exchanging personal income for community costs. This is not a profitable economic calculation. It is a chain reaction where a decision repeated enough times will no longer be a personal choice, but become the compulsory logic of an ecosystem that has gone out of whack. Number 5. Distribution of benefits and path of mining assets. Gold does not stay where it is found. From its mines deep in the Sahara, the precious metal travels through an informal logistics system, crossing borders, passing through middlemen, and disappearing from national records. Unverified gold losses in some areas can be as high as 70%. The cycle begins with the collection of cargo. After separating the raw gold from the ore, the buying groups will price it on the spot, paying directly in cash or through intermediaries in exchange for essential goods such as fuel, water, and mining equipment. The gold is then transported north via desert routes to transit hubs such as Sebha, Libya, Agadez, Niger, or In Salah, Algeria, before continuing its journey to markets beyond the continent. One notable point is that the price of gold at the mine is always 30 to 50% lower than the international price. This difference does not reflect transportation or storage costs, but is a discount to avoid control. When passing through unofficial border gates, gold does not need documents and cannot be traced. At the final destination, the gold is reprocessed, its geographical traces erased, and then enters the global consumption system in a legal form. In this entire chain, the miner is the link with the lowest profit margin. The question that needs to be asked is, who collects the majority of the remaining value? It is not the mine owner, nor necessarily the producer. It is the entity that has the ability to transform the status of the commodity from untraceable to internationally tradable. In this model, all costs, from health risks to environmental risks to social unrest, are borne by local communities, while the greatest share of value added is captured far away where the miners never set foot. This is not a case of skewed distribution, but rather the deliberate construction of a closed benefit chain that completely excludes the original producers. Number 6. Informal control structures and the role of armed groups. In mining areas, outside administrative control power comes not from the law, but from the ability to maintain order by private means. Organized groups armed with weapons and vehicles control large mining areas not by administrative paperwork, but by deciding who has access and who does not. Security fees are collected, profit sharing is determined, and disputes are resolved on the principle of profit first civil rights. Second, the informal tax levied at mines ranges from 10 to 30% of the total gold produced. This does not go into the public purse, but is reinvested in the operators themselves to expand their control, improve equipment, or gain silence from border guards. In fact, it is these revenues that allow the harsh mining areas to continue for years without being cleared or regulated. In the midst of this structure, the timely question to ask is, where does power come from, if not from the law? In fact, power here comes from the absence of central control and the vacuum that armed groups fill. When the state is not capable of being present on the ground, these groups become an alternative mechanism, not in the direction of institution building, but in the direction of consolidating interests. This model of control affects not only mining operations, but also shapes population distribution, migration flows, and even the economic structure of the region. Its existence is not accidental, but a direct consequence of the simultaneous absence of three elements: clear property rights, effective administrative systems, and sustainable border security. In such conditions, the role of who has a gun and an organized group completely replaces the role of licenses and citizenship. Number 7. The economic border between global production and consumption. Much of the gold mined inland never stops in Africa. Once collected and refined, it is quickly shipped out of the continent via underground trade routes entering the global supply chain through hubs in the Middle East and Southeast Asia. In the past year alone, some regions have received gold of unknown origin worth an estimated $1.5 billion. In the final markets, prices are 40 to 60% higher than the purchase price at the point of origin. This difference reflects not only operating costs, but mainly represents differences in the level of transparency and legality of the product. The issue is not production capacity, but control over international standardization. One thing to note is that gold does not automatically find its way to the high-end markets. It is the trading systems banks and upstream businesses in developed economies that facilitate this process. Importers accept gold with unclear origins to reduce input costs or increase flexibility in supply. This silence creates a tacit consensus structure where benefits are maintained only if the question of origin is not raised. Between the two poles of production and consumption lies an invisible barrier where weak laws and strong market laws coexist. When the final consumer spends money to buy an item, few know how many layers of exclusion, extraction, and redistribution that value has passed through. The fact that gold from an unregistered mine can become a legal investment is a clear manifestation of the misalignment between the ethics of production and the norms of consumption. It is not that the system does not know, but that the system knows very well and chooses to keep the structure intact. Number 8. Cumulative risks in survival structure. In artisanal mining sites in the Sahara, risk is not an accident, but a default part of the economic ecosystem. Participants in the chain accept a high probability of loss. From the start, the risk of injury from toxic gases, chemical exposure, and mechanical accidents is 30 to 40% in the first 3 years of work. This level of risk does not decrease with experience because working conditions do not improve over time. This is not limited to low-income countries. In many former gold mining regions of South Asia and South America, similar patterns of losses are still occurring, suggesting that the nature of risk is not a matter of location, but of organization. The difference lies in the response of the system. Where control mechanisms exist, losses are recorded and remedied. Where they are absent, losses become a fixed part of social costs. A case in point: if the full cost of risk from health hazards to environmental degradation were added up and factored into the final price of each gram of gold, would the end consumer be willing to pay a price that truly reflected the entire production chain? In fact, in informal economic models, such as artisanal gold mining in the Sahara, prices do not reflect real value. They reflect the ability to circumvent norms and risk-taking at the community level. This disparity not only creates temporary inequities, but also creates a skewed logic of development where more risk is taken, the more short-term profits increase, and the longer-term ability to correct mistakes is reduced. In such a structure, losses are not eliminated. They are merely transferred from the production level to the social level. Number 9. The Sahara extractional structure and two contrasting models. Gold mining is not unique to the Sahara. Similar structures exist in the Indian state of Uttarakhand, where a large portion of the population has shifted from agriculture to artisanal mining. In a landscape with rugged terrain, a lack of infrastructure, and no policy to support the transition. Mining sites here are seasonal, dominated by private collectors without environmental inspections and short-lived. The gold produced is much lower than in the Sahara, but the distribution chain is almost identical concentration of pricing power at the purchasing level and minimal profit for miners. At the other end of the spectrum, the mining model in states like Alaska or Nevada in the United States shows a different way of operating. All mining projects are subject to a multi-level permitting process. Environmental impact assessments, land use rights, waste management procedures. Operators are required to establish an environmental restoration fund before operations and are subject to regular financial audits. This does not eliminate risk entirely, but it does translate much of the long-term cost into clear legal obligations. Between these two extremes, why do some regions maintain asymmetric structures that have lasted for decades? The lack of decentralization, disinvestment in local institutions, and lack of control over export flows make mining an autonomous entity. It does not operate within the national development system, but on its periphery, both subsisting on national resources and disrupting central coordination structures. This makes any sustainable development effort slow or impossible without fundamentally changing the operating mechanism. Number 10. Long-lasting effects. Informal gold mining areas in the Sahara are currently caught in a spiral of structural contradictions. On the one hand, they generate intra-regional cash flows, attracting workers who have no other choice. On the other hand, they undermine governance, disrupt socio-economic planning, and impose irreversible environmental burdens. It is worth noting that most of the efforts to improve them have encountered the same obstacle, the lack of enforcement tools and clear benefit-sharing mechanisms. Several policy programs aimed at legalizing small-scale mining have been tried in several West African countries. The common approach involves licensing individual or cooperative miners combined with technical assistance and environmental monitoring. However, participation rates within the legal framework are typically below 15%. The problem lies not in the model, but in the disparity of benefits. Compliance with regulations immediately reduces income compared to freestanding operations without any compensation in infrastructure or market access. There is one detail that cannot be overlooked. The groups that control the field have no incentive to maintain formal programs. The legalization of a sector comes with the possibility of losing their power. In this context, reform is not just an act of government, but also a process that directly impacts the informal interest structures that have existed for too long. Regions that have experienced successful transformations have three elements: consistent political commitment at the central level, meaningful participation of local communities in policy design, and transparent benefit distribution mechanisms backed by independent audits. Without any of these three pillars, any improvement effort will miss the mark and reproduce the very thing it seeks to change. In the case of the Sahara, the gap between policy and practice is not a matter of perception, but rather an implementation gap that has not been filled. Beneath the scorching sands of the Sahara lies not only gold, but also stories that will never be recorded. Stories of communities fending for themselves on the economic fringe of vested interests, operating outside the light of the law, and of entire global value chains built on asymmetries. What happened here is not an exception, but a mirror of how the world works when the gap between resources and power is too wide. And that is why we choose to tell it. Not to conclude for you, but to give you a clearer view of the mechanism behind what seems so simple. A gram of gold, a receipt, a piece of jewelry. If you think this information is worth seeing, more people know, please like it, so the algorithm doesn't drown it out. Subscribe to the NVL Travel Documentary channel so you don't miss out on real stories from places few people can go. And if anything makes you think, After watching this video, leave a comment not for us, but to give others a perspective. See you again on the next journeys, where the economic map and the human map always intersect at unexpected points.